Hello and welcome to episode 16 of series 3 of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. This is the show for employee engagers and internal communicators who like to keep up to date with all that is new in our profession. My name's Craig Smith from The Big Picture People. I hope you're having a good August. You might be listening to this on holiday. It seems that everybody at the moment is on holiday or planning their holidays. Very popular time of year across in Europe and the UK for holidays, and it's very hot and humid at the moment. But we're really busy at the moment. Really interesting projects that we've got on the go. So no holidays for us, but happy to be here on the podcast. What I thought I'd do is just really quickly at the beginning, like I normally do, just give you a quick heads up on what's coming in the next few episodes, next couple of episodes coming up after today's. So on the 30th of August, we have an interview with Jonathan Hensley from Emerge. He's going to be telling us all about how we can align leadership and action, how we can make sure that our leaders' words match their deeds, and the importance of that in communications, which I'm sure we're all aware of. Then following that, on the 13th of September, got a great interview with David Hutchins, who is from a company called The Storytelling Leader. David does some amazing work with some huge organizations around the world on helping their leaders to tell better stories. And that's not just about kind of telling fables and that sort of thing, but it's very much around how we can get them to articulate their vision, their views, their whole leadership ethos through effective storytelling. And David's going to be telling us all about how storytelling is at the heart of great communications, which again, I'm sure we're all acutely aware of. On the subject of guests, we are trialing some software at the moment. Now, we haven't actually used it in anger yet, but we're looking at anyone who might be interested in being on the show, but in a shortened format. So not a full interview like we normally do, but just it's like an automated interviewing software, if you like. I'll ask you some questions that are pre-recorded questions. You can answer them, and then we will edit them together into a short soundbite that we can put into the show. And what we're thinking might be interesting is, rather than the full-length interview, some people might just want to come on and just talk a little bit about what they're doing and share some of their own experience, some of their own stories with our audience, but don't feel as though they want to be kind of going through a full interview. So typically what we're expecting is a clip would last about 5 minutes, and it's just an opportunity, as I say, to answer some automated questions that I will fire at you through this particular piece of software. So if you're interested in that and you'd like to find out a little bit more about it, as I said, it's entirely voluntary. You can imagine, of course, it's voluntary. But if you're interested in that and you kind of like the idea of being on the show, but you don't really want to go through a full interview, or you don't want to speak for a full sort of half an hour or so, then what you can do is you can just drop me an email at craig@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk. That's craig@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk, and I'll send you a link and you can have a go at it. And if it doesn't work, there's no pressure. If you're not happy with the outcome, or you're not you don't think what you've said is what you want that on the show, then obviously we won't use it. You can let us know. And similarly, we'll let you know if we think, either it needs re-recording, or if we only want to use a little part of it or something. So it's an opportunity to be on the show. If you're thinking, I kind of quite like the idea of being on the podcast, but I don't want to really I don't want to be kind of speaking for that long. And obviously the opportunity that you've got with this, the way of doing this, is you can kind of re-record your snippet. If you don't like it, you can have a go at redoing it. So that's just a thought. Drop me a line, Craig at the bigpicturepeople.co.uk, and we'd be happy to have a quick conversation. We can exchange emails. We don't even need to probably talk. So that's that. The other thing that I just wanted to make you aware of is this week, and this is sort of very if you're listening to this after the day it goes out, you may well miss it. So we have another webinar coming up, which is on the 18th, this Thursday, 18th of August. So if you're listening to this, as I say, real time, then then you'll be able to sign up. If you miss it, though, I'll give you the link in a moment. You can still sign up for another repeat of this webinar that we're running on the 20th of October, and also on the 15th of December. So if you want to book up for one later in the year. So it's all about helping your employees understand your organization's big picture. It's all about how we can help our leaders to articulate the big picture of our organization, the vision, the values, the mission, all of those things that are really important for our employees to know, and how we can engage them in a conversation about that. So that's what the webinar is about. If you're interested in that, it's at 3:00 UK time, and you can sign up for that at our website. If you go to thebigpicturepeople.co.uk, go to the events tab on the menu and click down, you'll see it. It's the first event that's listed. There's a little drop down menu. You'll see the 18th of August. As I say, though, if you want to sign up for one of the events later in the year, if you've missed this one, then you're more than welcome to do so, and it's all completely free as well. I should have said. Okay, I think that is everything. Sorry, quite a long introduction. Let's get into the interview for this episode. Since the beginning of 2020, for most of us, we have experienced a huge transition in the way that we work. We are now, more of us are working from home, we're working hybrid, we're working in ways that we would never have been able to probably contemplate before the pandemic and before the needs of the pandemic and the isolation that followed. One of the things that we're probably all acutely aware of and that gets talked about a lot is about mental health and well-being. And what I wanted to do was to explore how we can use the tools at our disposal, whether that's Microsoft Teams or Zoom or all of the different suite of tools that have suddenly proliferated since the beginning of the pandemic and hybrid working, to actually help our employees with their mental health and their well-being. How can we build a culture where we communicate effectively, where we listen, where we share, but also where we create ways of working that are conducive to our mental health, to good mental health? So that's what we're going to be looking at in this interview, in the interview that we're going to be putting out into this show. We wanted to look at what are some of the tools that are available and how can we create a sense of digital well-being in our organizations when we're all working dispersed, when we're all working in different locations, and also when we're starting to re-emerge into a sense of hybrid working with people working remotely and together. Another important part of that is the idea of loneliness, that actually, ironically, we're hearing this quite a lot, is that despite being in meetings back to back on Zoom or Teams every day, there is also a heightened sense of loneliness born out of social isolation. And again, that might be only for a few days a week now that we're moving back into hybrid, but that is having an impact. And how can we minimize and mitigate that in our organization? So that's the topic for today, the importance of digital well-being in our organizations, and what tools do we have at our disposal to help us to be able to deal with that. So I hope you find this an interesting conversation. My guest today is Alex Graves. Alex is the co-founder at Silicon Reef, and Alex has over a decade of experience working with Microsoft collaboration tools for enterprise clients. As a non-technical person, Alex's focus is always on people-led outcomes, with a variety of clients increasing their employee productivity and engagement using Microsoft technology solutions. Alex is also the host of the Work Happy podcast. So good morning, Alex. How are you?
Yeah, really good. Thank you very much for having me on the show. Really appreciate it.
It's a pleasure. And whereabouts in the world are you for our listeners?
So I am based in the sunny south coast of England, just in Poole in Dorset. And I can look out of my window. I'm currently sat in my summer house in my garden, and I can see the sea just about. It's a bit of a grey day, but hey, it's springtime. Summer's just around the corner.
Sounds idyllic. So no, it just sounds lovely. I was on a train. I spent a long train ride yesterday up at northeast coast of Scotland, and it was having the sea in your view is hugely relaxing while you're working, and it's very, very good. So I'm massively envious of you. Even though I'm only about 7 miles from the sea, there's no way I can see it from where I am. So if you could tell us a little bit more about your work, how did Silicon Reef start? Where's it come from? Tell us a little bit more about the business. I've given a little bit of an overview there, Alex, if you don't mind.
Yeah, absolutely. No problem. So Silicon Reef is a Microsoft 365 Gold partner, Our mission is to help organizations towards working happy. And that's why the podcast that I host is called Work Happy.
Mm.
And as you mentioned, it's about productivity, employee engagement, and well-being. And we believe that the Microsoft 365 suite has what it takes to help people with their collaboration. And we formed 5 years ago, and it was five of us that formed the company. We were colleagues and friends who worked at Unilever. And the experience that Unilever gave us in the Collaboration Center of Excellence, as it was called then,
Yeah.
we really understood what it took for an enterprise scale movement towards agile working, as they called it, and we now know that's hybrid working, and the many phrases that it's gone through. And we were helping that business go on that journey. And Silicon Reef formed, as many kind of startups do, is through opportunity. And the opportunity really just came up that we said, actually, now could be the great time to start our own consultancy and take the experience that we've learned from Unilever and start doing it with other people. And then, so here we are, further down the road, and we're just over 30 people in our business. We have about 30 customers. Those customers range from Unilever, we're backing there again, Anglo American, Met Office, Sega, some other government customers too.
Fantastic. Yeah, I think I love those stories of ideas that started. I mean, our business started in a similar way. In fact, there was an idea that started in a corporate context, and hey, this could work outside with other businesses as well, because and I think it's great when those got that proof of concept internally, and you can take it to the rest of the world. So brilliant. And silicon, and the name Silicon Reef. I mean, I guess the silicon. I get the kind of silicon, or am I making an erroneous conclusion there about the sort of digital? Where did the name Silicon Reef come from?
So as with naming any business, it took us probably about 6 months to get the name right. But silicon is a digital part. There's a Silicon Valley where all of the innovation comes on, and we wanted to be seen as innovators in everything that we do. And so that's where the silicon part came from. And Reef, it's actually something, I live by the sea, but a reef is an ecosystem, and a reef thrives from things working together as an ecosystem, whether it's the fish that provide the nutrients, and then they take the food from the sea floor, the coral and everything. And really we see Microsoft 365 as an ecosystem of applications that when you start working with them all together, that's when you get the most out of it. So we felt that the Reef was really like a representative of the Microsoft ecosystem. So that's where it came from.
Excellent. No, that's a nice story behind it. It makes sense. And so I must admit, I'm coming at this from a perspective. Hands up, I don't use Microsoft 365, and I do use Office suite of products. So that's probably not entirely correct, but I guess generally speaking, it's more of a corporate application. I guess I might be wrong there, but I'm interested to know how practically it works. And so my understanding is sort of what you do is like personalizing intranets. It's kind of embedding those tools, and particularly nowadays, I guess Microsoft Teams, because as you alluded to, 5 years ago, I guess it was a harder sell, but whereas now it's kind of everybody is all over Teams, and we use it. Obviously, that's another aspect that I guess we do use. So, and I know part of that, your philosophy, and you alluded to this because you're a non-techie yourself, is about how we can use this to create better conversations, how we can use these platforms. And then again, it goes to your Reef analogy there of this ecosystem. So do you want to just say a little bit more as a non-technical person, to speaking generally, I guess, to non-technical people like myself, about what are some of the things you're doing there and how that kind of builds this happiness and engagement, and how you see that being able to facilitate that, as it were.
Yeah, you're quite right that that the Microsoft ecosystem, it is about lots of just different applications coming together to enhance that employee engagement and employee experience. And you think back over the last 2.5 years, Silicon Reef have been contacted probably maybe 2 or 3 times with more intranet builds than in the previous 2.5 years prior to that. And part of that is like a journey of the natural digital transformation that some organizations were going on, but the majority of it was driven by that growing importance of employee engagement coming to the forefront of organizational needs. And it really was expedited by the pandemic. And then, like you said, Teams was something that, people had an idea of. They may have used it for some messaging as Skype was going away, because Skype was always the thing that everybody was chatting to each other on.
Yeah.
And back in 2019, there were about 20 million daily active users of Microsoft Teams. And then you fast forward to January 2022, and there's 145 million daily active users. So that's just shown you how quickly everyone's adopted and grown towards that transformation trend of connecting with each other from that remote workforce, but also what happened in early 2021 and what we're seeing ourselves do more and more with our customers now was Microsoft timed it with the launch of a new platform that they called Viva.
Yeah.
And some of you listeners may have heard of things called Viva as a platform and how it plugs into Teams. And those of you that have got, maybe a SharePoint intranet will be looking at moving towards Viva connections. And Microsoft have really played a fantastic card here, because the timing of it was great, because they already had the platform growing in Microsoft Teams, and everybody's using it for chatting with each other, sharing files with each other, having meetings. And then Viva Connections Viva as a platform was launched. And Viva Connections was really the thing that Microsoft have launched late last year to say, everybody's working in Teams. This is what Microsoft call it the flow of work. It's a very Microsoft term, and it basically just means that if you're working in Teams, having your conversations and your meetings, and you want to continue with people not having to break their flow, which is where the flow of work comes in, by swapping application or swapping out to a browser, going and looking at your intranet, which was traditionally in a browser, or maybe your internal communications are received in your inbox via your Outlook email. And now it's available in Teams. So that flow of work doesn't really need to be broken anymore. And that shifting between applications, it's being reduced. So the more and more things that we're seeing people move towards is that enablement of the intranet and upgrading their intranet as their communications portal. But it's growing as a platform and a channel, really, where people can connect with each other, because it's putting it into Microsoft Teams, and that's where people are having their conversations.
So it's almost, I guess in like layperson's terms, you're almost kind of creating almost a corporate operating system where people, all of these things are working within that environment. I'm old enough to remember pre-Windows days where, you'd have to go and you'd have to open an application and it'll be in horrible kind of code, not necessarily code, but it was very, kind of Windows was the game changer there, where everything came into, the kind of, it was all icon driven, what you see is what you get sort of thing. Whereas, and I guess that's kind of the next iteration of that is what or Microsoft 365 and particularly Teams is what they're doing now is that sort of next version of that. Is that fair to say?
Yeah, that's really fair to say. And rather than seeing the Microsoft 365 as an app, you really have to look at it as, like you said, it's an operating system. It's where you you turn on your laptop and you don't even think about Windows nowadays, because before you know it, you've either opened up Outlook and you're in Outlook working, or you're in Teams starting your conversations. And it's really a platform that Microsoft have introduced with Teams, and they're extending it with the ability to add other apps like Viva, and Viva is actually a multi-tiered application. And the intranet is just one more app that you can now add in there to have your conversations and to start that engagement with your workforce.
Sure. Excellent. Anyway, we said we were non-techie, and we've just had a really techie conversation, or for me anyway, a relatively techie conversation. So I'm really intrigued now to go into the kind of the more human element of this. And you when we originally spoke, you talked about the fact that what you're looking at doing is building a well-being angle into this. So in terms of people can monitor how they're doing in terms of managing their time and their well-being. So this is something that's completely new to me, and using, I guess, this operating platform that we've just been discussing to not only to do my work, but also to, And I guess it's. I mean, I've got a you know, a smartwatch that tells me when I need to stand up, and it tells me when I've not washed my hands properly, and all of that sort of stuff. So I guess it's. But having it on your desktop is slightly different. So tell whether that's an accurate analogy or not, I don't know. But I'm really interested to find out more about how that works and how the kind of work you're doing in that space.
It is a good analogy because the smartwatch that you have, it gives you prompts, and whether you do it or not, that's kind of your decision. But it's there to help you to at least think about it. And again, Microsoft timed the launch of this thing called Microsoft Viva, and there's the other element of it. So we've talked about connections as the intranet. There's another element which is called Insights. And this is the thing that's like your smartwatch. It's understanding your work habits and understanding and helping you monitor how you collaborate with your peers, how many conversations you have in a day, how many meetings you have, how much time you block out in your diary to focus and to actually get things done and not be back to back to back on meetings. And it's there to help you to structure and monitor and maintain your work habits. And as we saw in the last 2.5 years, the term of Zoom fatigue and video burnout and all those things that we've never really heard of before suddenly started to be more prominent in our vocabulary when we're thinking about working life. And Insights is really there as a thing to say, like your watch, you've got this on today. Have you planned for that? Are you ready for that meeting? But also, would you like to take some time out in your diary to block it out for focus time, where people won't be able to stick in that last minute meeting into your diary? So Viva Insights is another tool that Microsoft provides you to help monitor that well-being, and it just monitors your work habits, and it's all completely anonymous. It's all it's not going to report it to your manager and say, oh, this person's not working or this person's working too much. It's there to help you to monitor your work habits. So again, that's part of the Viva suite. And then when you think about how that transitions into looking after yourself or maybe changing how you might work, another thing it has is it built in a virtual commute. And then when you think about this concept of the hybrid working world that we are going to be moving towards, and it's a natural evolution of our working habits, the commute that we used to rely on to switch off and to take some time out to think about and reflect on our day, going either to or from the office, it now has that built in to an email that gets sent to you every day in the morning to say, here's the things that you've got coming up, and I've scheduled my virtual commute for 5:30 every day to say to me, are you ready to start your commute, Alex? And it will prompt me and say, actually, Alex, it's the end of your working day. Let's start unwinding. Let's start thinking about what you've got on tomorrow, and it will help me write a task list as well of things that I want to carry over to my next day. So this is the productivity element of our work happy that we describe, and it's helping me think about what I've got ahead of me, prepare myself for the next day that I may have done on that commute if I'm on a train or in my car, just reflecting on my day and thinking about what I've got on tomorrow. But it also has the ability, and again, you have the Headspace app.
Yeah.
You literally have the ability to do like a Headspace. I think it's like a 3-minute Headspace where you can just unwind. And you may be sat at your dining table, as lots of people maybe will have been for their working life at the moment. I'm lucky enough to sit in my garden. But the ability to literally to detach yourself from that working day rather than just say, yep, laptop's done, I'm now straight into cooking dinner for the kids and off I go.
Yeah.
Take that moment to unwind.
Yeah.
And that's that well-being part that the Microsoft tools are helping us also to think about. And it's preparing us for that hybrid working world that is naturally being adopted now as we move forward.
Yeah, it's really interesting. I mean, as I say, I'm certainly not using that aspect of Microsoft 365, but it's really interesting. And I guess the analogy is because my watch tells me to, I was going to, I'm asking the next question I'm going to ask you is because you mentioned this around, you can turn it off and you can ignore it, and actually ignoring it can become a habit as well. So you did, but I mean, in terms of Mind Watch, it'll tell me, you need to do a mindfulness thing, which, when you're in the middle of a kind of like last minute proposal, sometimes it's like, not now, please, not now.
Not now.
No. But I mean, in terms of, and I'd be interested to find out, you've articulated really clearly there how it works. I mean, in terms of kind of culturally, I guess there's a cultural element within teams and within organizations, because if we're all using those features, then we're more, well, I guess it's kind of obvious to say, then we're going to more likely to use them. But I guess if I'm just sort of the one, only thing I seem to be the only one in my team who's sort of using this functionality and nobody else does, and they kind of just, override anything that I've got there that's for my own sort of mental health and well-being, and it kind of like means, well, what's the point? I mean, what's your experience in terms of, I guess, uptake of those attributes and those functionalities or features, and in terms of which organizations from your experience are really using them well, and maybe what are some of the things they're doing that organizations that maybe aren't using them as well could learn from? And I guess that's a really long, complicated question, but hopefully it makes sense.
No, I'm happy to kind of break that down a little bit as well, because our definition of working happy, we think working happy is different for everybody. So some people like to start their working day, with an hour blocked out in the morning to plan the day ahead, and then they start to think about, getting them ready for themselves. Other people would like to do that at the end of their working day, and things like these tools, they're just there to help you at least have a habit and to promote the habits, and whether you choose to do them or not. Like, there's a tool called Microsoft To Do, which is it's like an online notebook really that you would normally write down in a task list, and whether you're somebody who wants to do that in a digital format and actually write it into To Do, or you want to actually track it and just in your personal notebook and write it down, whatever fits you as an individual and your ways of working that work for you. Where we've seen our customers and where we see the market taking this is that we actually believe that internal communicators and the HR people and the employee experience people, they play a really big part in advocating and raising awareness. And we've seen some really good campaigns being run around well-being, particularly over the last couple of years. And these campaigns, internal communications campaigns, raise awareness of what's going on and how the tools work, not just from a technology perspective, but also how it can benefit you as an individual from your mental well-being and your focus and your productivity at work. And we work with our customers actually to run advocacy sessions, and we run them internally as well. We're only a team of 30. But we're at the moment, this Monday, we're running sessions on how to help ourselves be more productive and advocating some of the tools and letting people know, at least raising awareness internally. And I don't think it really matters what size of organization you are. Having your internal champions to be able to say, I'm a well-being champion and this is how I practice, and telling stories from, I've changed my work habits to use a virtual commute. And this is where internal comms and, running campaigns for awareness, it really comes into its own, because it's through telling those stories that you can drive adoption and awareness, as well as just like links to hints and tips and tricks.
Yeah, no, I think it's really, that's a really good point. I think like kind of legitimizing it through some use case stories, through how people have, started to normalize this, well, I guess not so atypical situation that we find ourselves in now, because we've been doing it for 2 years ago, but I still think it's still early days. We've got, it's been a huge change for everyone. So I think that's a really important part of, and in the role that, as you said, internal communicators, employee engagers, anyone who's involved in organizational development in that context can really help with. No, I think that's really good. And I mean, in terms of, we've talked about this before on the podcast, in terms of, I think one of the things we've noticed, and I've noticed and heard people talking about, is that obviously there can be sometimes a illusion of engagement through when we emphasize digital, because we're kind of used to social media and likes and shares and all of that sort of thing. We had a conversation back in the second series where we were looking at but is that actual engagement? Is liking something or clicking a little thumbs up actually engagement, or is engagement actually indicated when we see people starting to have a conversation around something? There's more of a kind of two-way flow. So I don't know whether this is something that your experience or you have experience of with the suite of tools that you're looking at, but how can we monitor how engaged people are with either the organization or with a particular message or within their team, rather than just looking at the kind of cold hard metrics of how many meetings we've had and that sort of thing? Is there a way within the tools that you use that we can actually measure whether, particularly, I'm looking at this primarily, I guess, from internal communication. So if we send a message out through our channels, which include some of the 365 tools, can we see whether that's just been read or whether it actually has sparked some sort of communication? What are your thoughts on that, Alex?
Yeah, so Microsoft, the most popular channel is still email. And you've still got that as your main channel for sending out the comms, and there's some great tools out there for tracking open rates and things and read rates. But like you said, it's that what's next, what's the follow-on conversation, and that listening piece, that really understanding. And this is something that Microsoft 365 doesn't really do that well yet, at least. There are things in the roadmap to help do more listening, and in a secure and safe way that doesn't jeopardize people's human rights and those sorts of things by sharing information. But there are things like in SharePoint, you've got some basic analytics to tell you the number of page views. You've got Yammer analytics around community engagement and practice, and Teams also has some basic engagement stats. There's nothing really that tells you anything around what people are saying and what they're doing in terms of sentiment around they're positive about something. If you're launching a new campaign or launch an article, are the comments that are being added, are they positive or negative? Or there's nothing really like that in the Microsoft suite today. But actually, what Silicon Reef did a couple of years ago, we have a product now called Ripple that plugs on top of the SharePoint platform and integrates with Microsoft Viva and 365. And we've built that specifically around running internal campaigns so that you can actually measure the engagement, measure the analysis, and it's actually pulling up, people making comments on news articles and things, and it's providing a dashboard overview of analytics to say that this is a very positive sentiment around this in campaign. And you can group lots of articles together against a campaign of well-being, diversity and inclusion. And we've actually built that as a product of our own. But the Microsoft suite itself is emerging and evolving, but there's nothing yet in terms of listening. And the analytical piece, it's very rudimentary today.
Okay. No, that's fair enough. And what about employee generated content? Because I know this always generates a really interesting debate around moderation, and some organizations are saying, hey, look, if we can't trust them to use a platform like this and generate their own content, then it's, treat them like adults, whereas others are much more controlled and wary. I mean, what are your thoughts and experiences on employees being allowed to just generate? And I'm obviously, anyone usually can generate emails or messages. I'm talking about more kind of mass communication type tools within these platforms. What are your thoughts on that, Alex?
Yeah. And the trust word, it comes up again and again and again when you think about employee generated content. We're working with some customers at the moment, and actually their views are some of them are very different. Some of our enterprise customers, in they're like 30,000 employees, for example, they still want that stage gate approval to say that if content is generated from within the business, it must be reviewed by at least 2 peers before it can be published. And the tools allow you to do that. The tools are set up to allow you to do that. But it's that trusting again of like, well, we don't want to put something out there that either reads badly or reflects badly on a thing. We have to have that moderation in place, and it becomes the intranet and content owner's job to do a lot of proofreading, really, and to go backwards and forwards. But we are seeing more of a trend, and I think some of the technology lends itself to this, such as Yammer, and Teams to a certain degree as well, in terms of the the size of the communications that you send, that kind of micro communication. And also think outside of the working world, things like TikTok and Twitter, the micro posts and small bits of bite-sized information being shared from within, Yammer or Teams or on a social platform, whether it's Facebook for workplace or whatever it might be. All those different tools are about that employee generated content. We aren't yet seeing a significant shift towards employees writing content that's surfaced on an intranet homepage.
Yeah.
That's still very much the intranet owner and the internal comms own that. But what we are doing, and again, something that our product does, it helps identify thought leaders. So if there are people creating lots of articles around well-being or writing lots of comments around well-being in a workplace, and in like Yammer, they might be using a hashtag of well-being, for example.
Yeah.
Using some of the analytics in Yammer, you can identify a topic and see who's posting the most.
Okay.
And that might help internal communicators identify thought leaders in the business who can do that employee generated content. And they might become a champion. And you wouldn't have known they were a champion because perhaps they're in a different geography to you. Perhaps they're somebody you've never even met or heard of before. But the technology can help you identify who those people are by using some really basic analytics of what's being talked around with this hashtag topic, who's posting the most around it, and you can pull up some information about that. But employee generated content still definitely has that trust element to it, and we haven't yet seen that big shift of let everybody to create content, because there's still that element of control. And I don't think that's going anywhere, but the platforms are there, such as Yammer, for example, where that social element can be taking place.
Yeah, I guess it depends heavily on the culture of the organization, the level of trust that exists already, that it's going to probably translate or be transferred into their attitude to letting people, kind of do this. And I remember back to the really early days of instant messenger when, having working in organizations where it had to be closed down because it was just, within a few weeks, because it was just turning into a kind of a totally and it was because people just didn't, there was no accountability and no monitoring of it. And yet, you kind of think, well, we've got even more of those tools at our disposal. And, people use social media, which I guess isn't really a very good analogy, I guess, so considering how some people use it, and I guess it's responsible and irresponsible use of these sort of platforms is, it's going to happen anyway, but I guess it does link to the culture of the organization to a large extent. I want to just finish off by asking you just a question which just really arose when we were chatting before we started recording, and it was just something I think is relevant to what we're talking about here. You were talking about a loneliness report, and it kind of resonated with me, and I don't know whether I've got the right context around this, but I think I've heard people saying, I've never been in so many meetings and yet never felt so lonely, with the kind of in the context of those meetings being digital now. I don't know whether that's what your loneliness report was about or whether it's related to that, but it just sounded really interesting in the context of what we've been talking about today. Could you tell us a little bit more about that, please, Alex?
Yeah, absolutely. So Silicon Reef are advocates of hybrid and remote work. We've been a remote business since we started. But something that was really highlighted as throughout the pandemic and everything was that everybody's really sat, like as I said, in the dining room or in their office at home or in the garden, wherever they are, and their only interactions really are through a screen. And that human contact is something that was becoming more and more important. And one of the things that we talked about as a team internally at the beginning of this year was we would like to see each other more as soon as we can. And it led us to thinking more and more about how people will have been lonely or isolated, and different types of some people aren't lucky enough to be surrounded by friends and family and parents and things. Some people are working in a one bedroom flat perhaps, or on their own, or a studio flat, and that's their working environment, and they might not see anybody for the whole day or maybe even beyond the day. And so we ran a survey to ask what have you experienced when working somewhere other than the office? And along with lack of motivation and disconnectedness, 36% of people said they actually felt lonely. And this led us to think about what that means in terms of the future hybrid workforce, and how we can actually combat that loneliness by doing more to be inclusive of people, to make sure that we are inviting people to connect with their colleagues some more. And we actually, as part of the report, we talked about the rise of the third workplace
Okay.
to try and prevent loneliness. And you've got your office, you've got your home, but what are the other places where people might be working? And more of a trend is a cafe, a garden, a co-working space. Some people even said they'd be working in the car. And our report really flags how you can do more to combat loneliness, and how
Mm.
technology can actually help with combating that loneliness. And the report goes on to say, with some recommendations and some action points that we can do, as well as some really important contact points with Mind. And there's actually a campaign to end loneliness as well,
Yeah.
because it's becoming something that's more and more talked about. And we ran this report. I think it was 1,000, just over 1,000 people responded into the report, and it breaks it down into different age groups. I hope we can put it into the show notes so people can actually see
Yes.
the report and see the outcome.
No, absolutely. I was going to ask that if we could do that, whether it was in the public domain or not. Or yeah, no,
Yeah.
that would be great, Alex. I'll go through at the end and just wrap up, and then I will go through a little bit more about any relevant links that we can stick into the show notes. No, that sounds really interesting, and I think really, important, because I agree. I think, and I think it's not just. I know you alluded to this, and I think it's important, co-working spaces, and being able to, even if you're now in a situation where it's just not. There are days where you just need some company, but you're not going to go into the office for whatever reason. I think having a co-working space, being able to sort of go into those is really important. But I think it's more than that, and I think it's really interesting for me because I've heard a lot of people talk about, well, it's been great for introverts working from home, and extroverts have found it really difficult. And I think there's an element of, and I'm using kind of very basic kind of psychological profiling language there, but I think there's an element of truth in that. But I think it's not just. I know people who I would say are more introverted who still have found it really difficult, and and in the same way I know extroverts in a busy kind of face-to-face working environment who sometimes struggle and just need a bit of quiet as well. So
Yeah.
it's not as, I don't think it's as kind of simplistic as that. I mean, did you report highlight any of those sort of factors, or was it really merely talking more kind of kind of looking at people in general, I guess?
Yeah, it highlights some factors about why people choose to work outside of the home or
Yeah.
office, and the report says about 40% of people do want to try and get away from distractions, and there's also about separating that home and that work environment as well. And lots of people actually do want to go back to either an office or that third workplace, just to try and put a separation between being at home.
Yeah.
But 26% of people said they want to go somewhere just to feel connected to a community of people as well. So yeah, the report highlights, it's not about technology as such, but it's more around, how we can think about being aware of this as a need from our employees, our colleagues, and our friends. And I think it's just raising awareness of that as something we need to consider, and how we communicate and engage and collaborate with our colleagues as well, and taking some time to recognize, we might need to make sure, don't just jump straight into a meeting, check how people are. Ask a question, do that. How are you doing? What do you get up to at the weekend? I think that's still that human factor, that humanness that's still needed.
Yeah. Fantastic. Well, look, Alex, that's been really, really wonderful. I've found I've learned a lot. I've learned a lot about tools that I didn't know existed within Microsoft 365, and I'm particularly interested and found it really enlightening around the fact that you've got these kind of, use the analogy of the smartwatch, and how the smartwatch and having that in a kind of corporate environment, I think is fantastic. And I like the idea of this single ecosystem of where you've got all of these tools coming together and to make it kind of seamless. But I also really like what we talked about there around this. You were very honest and saying, look, there's still work in progress in terms of these tools that look at engagement. But then, that whole well-being piece, I think, is massively important at the moment for organizations. I know a lot of, it's kind of become the latest buzzword, mental health and well-being, but I do think it's massively important given, the last thing we were talking about there around this kind of social upheaval that we've faced, which is, we are inherently social beings, and we're now working in ways that we don't have to be social, but we still need to be. And it's that sort of challenge that I think of how we reconcile that, I think is really important. I think, and your loneliness report, I'm definitely going to dig that out and have a look at it for myself. Anything finally from you, just to sort of wrap up, and before we talk about any links that we'll stick into the show notes, Alex?
No, just to say thank you very much for having me on the show. And the Microsoft 365 is a fantastic ecosystem, and it's all about how the tools can work together. The intranet is becoming more and more important as a communications channel, and what we've seen emerging over the last couple of years, and the way that technology is pushing, particularly enterprise customers towards, is that enablement of that single workplace, and again that flow of work, so you don't have to keep that context switching. And Microsoft Teams, it's a platform, or like you said, an operating system where you switch it on, and I can get up and running and do my work. And I just think that's the focus, I think, for the hybrid, that will support the hybrid workforce going forwards. And that's what we're here to help people to do.
Fantastic. Well, look, on that note then, in terms of reaching out to you, I'll tell you what I've already planned to put in the show notes, and you can ask, you can mention to see if there's anything else. I was going to put a link into your own LinkedIn profile, which I love. I know, I always know when people are kind of LinkedIn savvy when they've got their name sorted out in their URL, but I love yours because I am Alex Graves, so I really like that. So I noticed that. And then I'll put a link into Silicon Reef as well, so people can have a look at the work that you do there. We mentioned the loneliness report. You don't need to read out the URL, but I'll get the loneliness report off you if that's okay. We'll do that after we've finished recording. Anything else you'd like us to share with the listeners?
No, just LinkedIn is where I'm most active, so please feel free to follow me on there. We're doing a lot of work around loneliness in the workplace, as we've mentioned, and we, the report has had a great deal of feedback. But also, if you do want to know more about things like Viva Topics and Viva Learning and the Viva Suite and how it plugs in, I'm regularly posting content on there about that. And so, if you wanted to follow somebody just to learn more about it, and what it can do and how it can benefit you, a lot of our content is geared towards the internal communications staff. So it's not technical language. It's great. It's language that will make you understand and see how it can work for you as an individual, and you and your company that you work for as well. So feel free to connect.
And also, I was just thinking there is also the your podcast as well. So Work Happy, we'll put a link, and that is on iTunes and all the usual.
iTunes. We're planning on starting recording again this summer.
Yeah. Okay, fantastic. Okay, well, I'll put a link into the tends to be iTunes is the most ubiquitous, but I'm sure that people, if they've got other platforms they listen to the podcast on, they'll be able to find it. It's a fairly unique title. Okay, fantastic. Well, look, fantastic to speak to you, Alex. Really, really good conversation, and we may get you back on the show at some point in the future, because I think this is definitely an emerging space that will continue to be of interest, and as you identified, is constantly evolving at the moment at quite a rapid rate. So I think it'll be good to get you back in the future at some point and have another catch up with you, if that's okay.
Yeah, happy to do so, and thanks a lot, Craig, for having me on.
My pleasure. Thanks, Alex. Take care. Thank you.
Thanks a lot. Cheers.
Bye bye. We hope you've enjoyed this episode of the Engaging Internal Comms podcast. If you've got any ideas for episodes you'd like us to cover in future, you can email us at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk, or you can use the feedback form at engagingic.com. If you're not already subscribed to the show via your podcast platform, please do so. And if you could leave a review for us, that would be absolutely fantastic. We have links to other episodes at engagingic.com. All of our previous episodes are available there. And if you're interested in our visual communication services, our big pictures, our learning maps, our explainer videos, and also our live graphic recording, please get in touch with us again at info@thebigpicturepeople.co.uk. Thank you.